request for proposals back in September of last year, and we were fortunate to get 40 teams submit proposals to the event. We whittled those down to 12 finalists, who then underwent a 9-month intensive innovation and development accelerator course led by Dr. David Olson. And through this, they got expert instruction, mentorship, coaching. They learned how to define and submit their intellectual property, understand their customers, develop their commercialization plans, and really move their technologies forward for real patient impact. So this last month, we had them all present to our oversight committee, which was made up of primarily folks outside the university with expertise, content expertise in industry, in venture capital, in areas that we really could evaluate and do due diligence on the team's ideas. And there were 6 teams that were awarded almost $500,000 in funding, which is unprecedented for a Department of Surgery to be able to do this. And you're going to hear presentations from the top 4 award-winning teams, which include Furoxamine, the Michigan Endoluminal Lengthening Device, the Minute Coaching System, and Surgical Asset Tracker. Other award winners were Hotspot and MultEye Laparoscopic Camera. So let me introduce first our guest sharks for the event. First is Paul McCreadie. Paul is a managing director here in town at Arboretum Ventures with expertise in digital health and IT, and he's been a managing partner there, director since 2011. We also have Jonathan Murray. Jonathan is a director at Draper Triangle Ventures in Detroit. And lastly, Dr. Kevin Tremper, who's the Robert Sweet Professor and Chair in the Department of Anesthesiology and also known as a co-founder of Health Alert Watch. Okay. So without further ado, we're going to have our first team present, and it'll be Surgical Asset Tracker. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Inglesby. Oh yeah, so everybody should have a little clicker. I'm going to give you instructions on that after all the presentations because the audience vote will count. All right, this advances. Should be good.
How long do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Great. It's an honor to be here. I want to thank Mark. Actually, it's been a really remarkable experience. We've come a long way. You don't realize how little you know about trying to bring an idea to market, and we still have a lot to learn. But where we started is definitely in a very different place than where we are now. So thank you, Mark, and your team. So this lady has a problem for the non-clinicians in the world. She has an obstructed left kidney, urosepsis. She's an old lady who could potentially die from this problem. The cause is a retained ureteral stent in her left kidney. See a bunch of calcification above and below. And this is a big deal for this lady. Who today is going to operate? Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you're going to go to the OR. Hi, everyone. All right, who's going to leave something in a patient? The nurse is going to get something and give it to you. Who's going to leave a device in the patient? Raise your hand. All right, I see Dr. Eliason's the only one. Well, interestingly, the majority of us, before we die, will have a temporary medically implanted device in our body. So the average in the United States now is 58% of Americans at some point in their life have a device in their body. And the point is that there's really no way to keep track of these things. So inspired by patients like this lady, our team went through the FFMI program to develop what we call the Surgical Asset Tracker. So this is how it works. In the operating room, you ask for a device. The nursing team goes and gets this asset, so to speak, off the shelf. One thing we do every time is we send a bill for these devices. There's a message. Our product listens for this message within the EHR and develops a ledger of kind of surgical asset, patient, what asset was placed, and we essentially keep track of that. So we started off in ureteral stents, but it soon became clear to us that there's a huge space here. So today at the University of Michigan, probably about 15% of the operations are going to include, or procedures are going to include, leaving some kind of device in a patient that's supposed to be tracked, but it is not. There's no technology to do this. And look at these procedures. You can see many of us do these on a daily basis. my interest is in kidney transplantation. We started putting ureteral stents in all of our kidney transplant recipients simply because we left a bunch of stents in over the years. We decided that we'll just leave them in everyone so that we have a uniform process on how to do this, even though some patients probably don't even need it. We're going to focus on the IVC filter. Anyone who's been in Michigan a long time knows that this was developed by our esteemed Dr. Greenfield. And when he developed it probably 40 years ago, it was intended to be left in place forever. These are now retrievable devices. So for non-clinicians, these are stents that are placed in the large vein that kind of goes from your legs up to your abdomen to prevent blood clots from going to your lungs, causing a pulmonary embolus, commonly put in patients who are critically ill. And the problem essentially is these can be left in place. Anyone who operates in retroperitoneum has come across these things, and there's no record that it was there, and you're operating on this space and you say, what is that? Oh, there's a cable filter. So in the United States, about 88,000 of these things are placed every year, and surprisingly, as we've learned, only 20% are retrieved. All of them are designed to be retrieved. Some patients die before retrieval is supposed to happen, but approximately 20% of them are actually kind of scheduled to be removed. So the vast majority are left in place essentially because we don't keep track of them. And the business opportunity beyond just improving patient care is that hospitals make $5,000 when they put them in, but they make $10,000 when they remove them. So hospitals are leaving a lot of money on the table by leaving these devices in patients. In addition, there's growing regulatory pressures to remove all assets that are intended to be removed. So right now, there's no specific regulations except one. Just this year, the interventional radiology kind of CMS payment program is going to require them to start to track certain devices that they leave in patients and have a system for this, but there's no product to fill that space. And those regulatory pressures are going to continue to grow just because it makes sense. Customer discovery, we've talked to this cohort of esteemed colleagues to try to understand this technical problem, particularly interventional radiologists, vascular surgeons, people with experience in device manufacture, and this is our solution. We have cloud-based software that automatically registers patients who receive any kind of temporary implantable device. It's compatible with all electronic health record systems. It listens essentially in the back for these billing information and sends alerts to providers, provides a ledger of assets, and then also a ledger that removes assets once they are taken out of patients. And we're also developing essentially proprietary algorithms to determine kind of using clinical logic when these things should be removed. So for example, Mr. Smith had an IVC filter placed. Mr. Smith has been on anticoagulation for 6 weeks. We should call Mr. Smith and have him come back in for removal. So our customers are hospitals that place these things. There's 2,200 in the United States, and physicians, approximately 5,000 interventional radiologists, vascular surgeons, cardiologists place these in the United States. And then, of course, the 88,000 patients who have these placed every year. So the value proposition, well, certainly this is good for patient care, and I think the sky is the limit regarding various devices that we could apply this to, but we're focusing this use case on IVC filters, and essentially the value proposition for hopefully relatively quick value of our product is the fact that the majority of these are left in place, and we're simply going to solve a problem, make sure these patients come in and get these devices removed. We estimate that's about $700 million a year of IVC kind of filter left in place that it couldn't be removed. So the current state, so how do we do this now? Even at the University of Michigan, we do not have a solution for this. Different physicians, different groups have different attempts at solutions, but in short, that's why 80% are left in place. People keep track of them various ways. The state of the art is probably at Northwestern, where they have an entire clinic. It's staffed full-time by 2.5 FTE nurses to keep track of their IVC filters and to bring people in to have them removed. It's good business to remove them, but it takes, at Northwestern, they staff an entire clinic just to do this. Device manufacturers do this, so they offer, Bard in particular offers a product to do this. Unfortunately, there's a diverse number of vendors who do this, and there's no one solution. So the advantage of our product is it's automated, high fidelity, it tracks with alerts. There's no FTEs or no individuals that have to spend time working on this. It's agnostic to device, it's agnostic to manufacturer, and it integrates into any major EHR. So just to step back, the market for surgical access or medically implanted devices is large. It grows approximately 9% per year, and the current market is $74 billion. It's a large market. Of that, the IVC filter market is about $200 million. And it continues to grow. We estimate it'll be about $318 million in about 5 years. Our lead market is going to be the hospitals that place over 200 of these a year. Relatively small cohort. They're hospitals like ours. We know who they are. Intellectual property, our primary IP, is that we know the optimal sequence, essentially how to do this within the clinical workflow. The focal point will be a solution that's effective and that works in to how patients receive care and how clinicians and staff do the care. Our software can be copyrighted, its name can be trademarked. In the future, we'll continue to develop kind of algorithms that know when various devices need to be removed. Our regulatory strategy, we are not regulated by the FDA. We will have to be HIPAA compliant. Business strategy, we're going to have a startup that develops and commercializes solutions for tracking temporary implantable devices. We're going to focus initially on IVC filters. Our sales strategy will be software licensing. Additional revenue streams may include selling our data. Likely future acquiring companies will include medical device manufacturers, health IT companies who value big data. So our risks include technical, market, and team risks. Technical risks, it's hard to implement software in hospitals. We've done this in the past. We'll continue to develop this, and that'll be a primary focus of how we use the precious monies that we receive from the Department of Surgery. Market risks, it takes a long time to sell to hospitals. We'll target high-volume hospitals to overcome this risk. And our team, we're 3 professors. We don't have anyone who has expertise in business or startups, and we'll have to remediate that problem. So our last kind of customer discovery was to talk with some seasoned entrepreneurs, and they gave us this advice. Address our technical issues we identified in our successful pilot here at the University of Michigan, extend our platform to IVC filters, and to test our platform in non-EPIC hospitals outside of the University of Michigan. So this is our timeline. We are just at the end of the green. We just graduated from SIDAC. And we're honored to be finalists and move forward with our work over the next year. We hope by this time next year we'll be ready to raise seed funding and recruit a business team. So thank you very much. This is our team. I'm Mike Anglesby. John Hollingsworth is really the heart and soul of this. He's in the urology department. And Mark Newman is a computer engineer who developed the technology. Thank you very much.
All right. Next is Dave Hughes, who's going to be talking about the Minute Coaching System.
Thank you, Mark. Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Hughes. I'm a faculty in the General Surgery Department. I'm going to talk about our experience with the Minute Coaching System. How many people here have used this to evaluate, to give feedback to a student? So a lot of people in the room have seen this. We've had this since about 2015. We started it by trying to fix a problem we had in the surgical clerkship. So I'll tell you a little bit about how we created it, where we are now, and where we want to take it in the future. Dr. Reddy and Dr. Sandhu are also kind of co-workers in this system. So we have a problem in medical education. Right now, medical students really don't get enough feedback about their performance. Most of what they learn during the 3rd and 4th year of medical school is learn taking care of patients or watching us take care of patients. They really have no way to improve and actually get some feedback performance about how they're doing. The faculty also have problems. We spend so much time in clinic, it's very hard to give students appropriate feedback. We also have problems evaluating students. We're asked to evaluate the students after a month on the clerkship. We often forget who the students were, how they performed. That time difference is very difficult for us. So we have a couple problems that we tried to fix with this Minute feedback system. So we created this in 2015. We created it mostly out of the fact that students rank the surgical clerkship last amongst all the other clerkships in getting appropriate feedback about their performance. So the way the Minute coaching system works, the students get an email at the beginning of the rotation. This email includes a link that allows them to request feedback from any faculty or any student or any resident that they worked with during the day. At the end of the clinical day, they use this link. They fill this out and pick the resident or faculty who they worked with, and they ask for a specific thing they want feedback about in terms of their performance. Immediately, the faculty receive an email. That email takes them to this other survey allows them to do 1 minute of free text feedback to the student about whatever the student is asking feedback for. The key is this takes just a minute. It's very close in time with their interaction with the student. It's very easy, and it gives the student extra feedback that they can't get normally. The other aspect of the system is that it collects all this feedback in a database. This database tracks how often the student asks for feedback, how often the faculty respond, and the content of that feedback. This database is really beneficial from a clerkship director standpoint. It allows us to track how students are doing. We can interact or intervene on students that are not doing well before the end of the rotation. It also helps us track faculty engagement. It also has allowed us to do some faculty development in terms of how to actually give students good feedback. This database has also been a nice research platform. It's allowed us to present our research at national forums about how students get feedback and how faculty give feedback to students. We presented this at national meetings, and now we have 7 papers based off this database. It's a very unique way to track feedback. Feedback is typically given in a verbal, face-to-face interaction, and this is not intended to replace that. This is just an adjunct and additive thing that we can do. So we started this to correct that problem with the clerkship. We started this with a pilot with students who had access to the minute coaching system versus students who did not. And when we compared the two, it really fixed our problem with feedback. It also made the clerkship experience better overall. So since 2015, we've been using this system, and we found it to be very valuable for both the students and the faculty. For the students, they get more feedback. It's more timely. They have a chance to change before the end of the rotation. And overall, I think they'll be better doctors because they're getting more feedback. Faculty also benefit from this. We now send the feedback responses to the faculty at the end of the rotation. It helps them recall how the students performed, helps them to fill out evaluations, makes it easier to fill out those end of rotation evaluations. That way they have more time to spend on other things like patient care and academics. So looking at the stakeholders, the students and faculty seem to appreciate the minute coaching system. The database feature of the minute coaching system is really beneficial for the clerkship directors. It allows us to track student and faculty engagement. It also helps the medical school, which is often required to prove that medical students are actually getting appropriate feedback to the accreditation bodies like the LCGME. So the customer marketing would really market this minute coaching system to clerkship directors. Program directors could potentially use this. Residents need feedback just like medical students in terms of their performance taking care of patients. So what we would do is market this minute coaching system to clerkship directors around the country. During the presentations and national meetings, clerkship directors always come up to me and ask me for the minute coaching system. There's a couple of problems with the way we have it set up now that prevents us from sharing it with clerkship directors, and I'll talk about that in a minute. If clerkship directors want this system, they have to convince the medical school to pay for this. Clerkship directors currently pay for similar online platforms for just educational content, things like WiseMD, which has modules that students work through, things like appendicitis or acute cholecystitis. So there's precedence there for clerkship directors to pay for things like this. The faculty will also benefit from it if they can get all those feedback responses for each student. It'd make those evaluations easier at the end of the month and probably better as well. So we've done some customer discovery. Like I said, the clerkship directors really want this system. When we presented this at national meetings, there's really nothing out there like this, and it's really something that can help clerkship directors solve a problem that they have, which is not getting enough feedback to students. We also presented this at some of the local meetings, and we won the Michigan Provost Teaching Innovation Award in 2016. That led to other schools like the nursing school, the pharmacy school, and even engineering asking to use this system. So our competitive landscape, right now there's nothing out there in medical education that serves a similar purpose as this. We've proven success at the University of Michigan over the past 3 years. Over the 3 years that we've used this, we now have over 10,000 feedback responses for 500 students that have rotated just through the surgical clerkship. It works, it's easy, and it seems to be continually functional over the past 3 years. In terms of intellectual property, because this is software, we can't patent this. We can't copyright the name, the Michigan Minute Coaching System. And overall, this is not going to make a lot of money like Mike's invention, but it can improve our academic notoriety across the nation. So our regulatory strategy, there is something called FERPA, which is basically protecting student information. And also this has to be appropriate with HIPAA. There's a potential that students or faculty can put in patient information into the system. And right now this is 100% compliant because it's password protected, and we limit who has access to the system by the clerkship director. So our business strategy is really national distribution of the Minute Coaching System, but it's only possible after we create a shareable prototype. Once we create the shareable prototype, we should be able to distribute it within the University of Michigan for some beta testing, and then distribute it nationally. Our idea is to give free initial use to schools, and then going forward after that, we charge a subscription cost to maintain the system. Our access strategy is either to maintain management of the system within the University of Michigan to gain notoriety in academia. There's also a possibility to sell the rights to this to a medical education company, which would control it from then on. So what we really need is a shareable beta prototype at this point. Right now, the system is based off Qualtrics. It's really just a survey software. It's not made for that interaction and the back and forth between people asking for feedback and people giving feedback. It also is really limited to expand this to a large scale. For every student and faculty that uses the system, we have to manually input their name and email, and this requires a lot of work on the administrative end. So really, we got to get rid of Qualtrics to make this a viable product nationally and on a larger population. So right now our milestones, we created the prototype of the Minute Feedback System in 2015. We've been using it. It's been working well. We'll continue to use it at the University of Michigan until we create our beta prototype. With the help of the Surgical Innovation Prize, we can take it to the next step. Our next step is to develop a standalone software platform for the Minute Coaching System. I've got some estimates from local software companies that can create a standalone system that can do everything the current system does and so much more that addresses our current problems. Our plan is to create this beta prototype over the next year, do some testing within the University of Michigan over 6 months, and then hopefully release a beta prototype nationally in about a year and a half. So this is kind of what I think the beta prototype would look like. The students will be able to request feedback just like they do now. They'd also be able to review their feedback history. They could look over the past 6 to 12 months, see if there's themes of things they're good at, things they're bad at. It allows them to search by name and department. There's even a potential for them to ask for feedback from people outside of the faculty. They could ask the nursing staff, they could ask scrub techs, potentially they could ask anybody they interact with during the day for feedback. The student view would look something like this. They'd have a log of all the feedback they've received. There'd be some opportunities to do some analytics on the back end to see if they have specific themes that they really need to work on. The faculty view would probably remain the same. I'd still like to maintain it as an email-based system so that the faculty get an email alert. It's very easy for them to do a one-line, 1 minute tidbit of feedback for the students. The clerkship director view would look something like this. They'd be able to monitor student performance throughout the rotation. They'd also be able to monitor faculty participation and feedback as well. From the administrative side of things, creating a new feedback platform would address the issue of manually entering every single new faculty that comes on board and allow us to do kind of batch onloading of that. So that's our plan. The Minute Coaching System has been pretty effective over the past year, but really to take it to the next step, we need that Surgical Innovation Prize. So thank you to the Department of Surgery. I'm really excited about the next steps. Thanks.
Thank you, Dave. All right, our next presentation is by Steve Buckman, who's going to talk to you about furosemide.
Thank you. Which is forward?
Forward.
And right?
Yeah.
This one? Thank you very much. I want to thank the Department of Surgery for giving us this great opportunity and Dave Olson for being a great coach. How many people out there have had a fracture or know somebody that's had a fracture? Please raise your hands. Look at that. Now, I can tell you that most of you healed with no problem. Could you imagine, because it was a pain, what it would be like if it didn't heal well and it took longer, or it didn't heal at all? Probably can't imagine that, but if you know some of your friends that have, it can be devastating. That's why Team Bone Health put together Furoxamend, which was something that we developed to accelerate fracture healing. What's the problem? The problem is that fractures create significant pain, as you can imagine, but also lost revenue, about $10 billion worth of downtime over the course of their injury. Do you know this gentleman, Roger Ebert, movie critic, very, very famous. Now, he had a problem. He had head and neck cancer, ultimately got radiated, and after that had a real problem with his radiation and a fracture, and that's what happened to him. But instead of hiding, instead of sort of going along with whatever happened to him, he wanted other people to know what it's like to be devastated in this way, so he was on the cover of Esquire magazine to bring this to bear. 20% of radiated fractures heal. That's it. That means 80% do not. Could you imagine having that fracture and it not healing? And the problem is that surgeons have no good solutions in brittle or irradiated bones. But we do. We put together this solution. It's called Furoxamend, a novel single-application bone filler device. And the device consists of hyaluronic acid and DFO putty, and it's formulated and put in this simple syringe. Now, what are the constituents? Hyaluronic acid, already FDA approved, but as a filler device. It's got structural support, an extracellular matrix, and it's got great viscoelastic properties that can fill that fracture site. DFO, or deferoxamine, is also FDA approved, but for iron overload, for something completely different. So it's already been in use in humans in much greater doses for things like hemochromatosis, where it actually binds that iron. It functions as an iron chelator, but our dose is much smaller, and it's put together as that group, and we can actually inject it if we want to. So we found the novel utility, really, of deferoxamine and seeing how that works. That local iron chelator, what happens is when you put it in the fracture site, it binds iron. Well, that iron is really, really important to an enzyme that breaks down what they call HIF-1 alpha. Since it doesn't break it down because the iron isn't there, it's constitutive. It means it sticks around. So we make blood vessels, and we make them well. And that is what happens. If you look at a fracture site which didn't heal, there's a lack of vascularity in that fracture site, which you can see on the upper area, and you get a non-union. But Furoxamend, which leads to increased vascularity, it's a burst of vascularity. Bone cells can attach, it enhances mineral deposition, and it facilitates the generation of biomechanically really good unions in bones. So who are the customers for this? How many of those people are out there? Greater than 2 million people in the United States and 10 million globally each year. If you add dental applications, because people get radiated in that head and neck area, you're talking about 1 million more customers that would use this. And who are the customers from the surgical standpoint? Orthopedic surgeons, plastic surgeons, and dentists. Why? Because it's easy to use, a single application, and although you can use it in the operating room, you don't have to. Under fluoro, you could inject it. Could you imagine if you're an older patient that has a fracture that won't heal? You can die from such a fracture. This is the kind of thing that can make a difference in that regard. Insurance companies? Sure. Pay less. So who are the stakeholders? Pretty much everybody. The patients want it, surgeons, hospitals, employers, and insurance companies, because it saves time, reduces cost, and it has very high performance. We already have patent applications, both internationally and through the US, both composition of matter and method of use. So how are we going to put this together, and who's the sort of competitive landscape out there? Well, it turns out that there's not just one company that dominates the market for implants out there. That's great. Why? Because any one of these companies can be a potential acquirer. These would be the strategics that would take this to the next level as we move forward. So is there anything else like it out there with our competition? Really not. The only thing that was close were 2 biologics that went out there. By the way, those biologics, when they went to the FDA, they were approved as devices, which means it didn't take as much time to be able to get them to market. One was called Infuse and the other one was called OP1. The problem was they were biologics. For people that are in manufacturing, biologics are very, very difficult to manufacture. We're not like that. We have our devices fairly easy to be able to use. They used it in a spine application, which was a mistake, and now it's on a black box warning because of overgrowth. Ours has been used for many years in different ways, and we have found over the last 10 years that we do not have a problem with overgrowth at all, and there really is no significant side effect profile. As I told you, they use it in much greater doses in different ways, but not in this formulation the way that we've done it. So let's look at the market size from a business proposition. The fragility market, which are oral fragile fractures, are greater than 10 million patients a year globally, 2.1 a year in the U.S. market. What does that translate to? Big bucks. $50 billion a year globally and $11 billion a year if it's in the United States of America. So let's look at what we're talking about when we're talking about the fragility fracture market. That could be, for instance, avascular necrosis, osteoporosis is fairly large, diabetes, spinal compression fractures. But look at the one in the red at the bottom, radiated fractures. Remember Roger Ebert? That's what we're talking about. Now, why did we make that decision? We made that decision because it was hard. That's why we did. If you can heal a bone in nuclear winter, you can heal a bone anywhere. So that's what we did. I want to show you what we've done with 10 years of NIH preclinical funding. If you look on this right side over here, then you'll see what a normal fracture healing would be. That's what normally happens with all of us. About 100% of our fractures heal. It's pretty rare for it not to happen. But when they're radiated, look at the bottom. You can see what happened to Roger Ebert's mandible right there. Fell apart. But look above. That's the vascularity that it has. That's exactly what I was talking about. But with furosemide, look what happens. It bursts with blood vessels. And what does that mean? We go from 20% to 91%. We're talking about a major change. 5 times in the ability to actually get a union and move it forward. But would this really work in humans? Well, why? Yes, it does. When I go on these, I'm a craniofacial surgeon, and I go out and I talk about this, especially some of my preclinical work. What do the surgeons out there want to know at the meeting? Where can I get this stuff? So I had one guy that called me, one doctor out from Stanford, and he said, I have this patient. If you look at over there, his midface didn't grow because he had radiation like Roger Ebert. I want to be able to move his face out and do surgery, but I know it's going to fail. What can we do? I said, well, it's not on formulary right now. We can't do it, but we have one component on formulary. We can try that. Well, we did off-label. We put 2 tubes back in the areas back of his maxilla. One of them fell out. That wasn't on purpose, but it did give us an internal control. And it turns out that if you look on the left side, there was really very, very little bone that formed. And on the other side, a burst of bone. And if you look down there, it worked. It was fortuitous. I had nothing to do with the tube falling out. It happened at Stanford. So there you go. Go blue. It wouldn't have happened here. But I'm sort of glad that it did. So what's our plan? Our plan is to de-risk. That's what we're going to do until we get that stakeholder. So what we're going to do at first is continue to complete preclinical GLP studies. GLP just means good lab practice. Hire regulatory consultants. We've already talked to them. One of the keys that we need to do is to get a designation by the FDA as a device. It's not that far out there to be able to get that done because, as I told you, those biologics were devices in the past. So our plan right now is to get that FDA designation and then a clinical trial. Will that be expensive? 91% versus 20. You'll probably only need 100 patients to be able to show it. So then what we do is we just continue to de-risk. We can move from there to avascular necrosis, to diabetes mellitus if we want, but at some point we will exit. Why? Because a stakeholder will be in there. A key stakeholder will be the ones that we want to be able to take it to the next level. So our revenue cost proposition is quite profitable. Our target fracture, which is just that radiation fracture, about 100,000 patients annually. Price per syringe, we know what the BMP got, $6,500. What does it cost us? $100. Pretty nice profit margin. If you do that math, that's $650 million. But that's for the small group. If we actually talk about the entire fragility market at 2.1 million patients, now we're talking about big bucks, $13.65 billion with a B dollars moving forward. So what's our risk category? We're defining a regulatory pathway. We have the people online to be able to do that with very, very good promises about what might happen, but of course, that's a risk as we move forward. We want to be either a device versus a drug-device combination by the device side of the FDA, and we're going to work with them to mitigate the problems that we have to move forward. So what's our business strategy? Seek regulatory consultations from our experts, sort of already there. Continue preclinical validation studies. We have a punch list that we're doing right now. Complete GLP studies and prepare for that designation to the FDA. But the main thing is, and what I want to do is bring our product to market so we can form a corporation, but we can exit at any point when the right stakeholder comes around. What are our milestones? Regulatory consultations, and we're working with them right now. Complete the preclinical validation GLP studies and prepare for that request for designation as we move forward. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to bring Furoxamin to you and to your attention, and with the possibility that one day when I'm in the operating room here at the University of Michigan, I can say, give me that Furoxamin. I think I can use it today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. Okay, our last presenter today is Matt Rawls, and he's going to talk to you about the MEND team.
Thanks a lot. Morning. Great presentation so far. Honored to be part of this group. So I also want to thank the surgery department and the innovation program itself. It's been fantastic, as the other groups have mentioned. So MEND focuses on a problem called short bowel syndrome, which is caused by massive intestinal resection, mostly in the pediatric population. This leaves patients unable to eat or drink and are stranded on IV nutrition or total parenteral nutrition with no good treatment options. And while TPN allows babies to grow out of infancy and into toddlerhood and school age and even young adulthood, it's very costly. For the patients, there's 100% morbidity. This is in the way of line infection, liver failure, sepsis, requiring many hospitalizations, high mortality rate, and overall poor quality of life. It's also costly for the payers. Each one of these kids costs $300,000 per year for life. So MEND is focused on treating these children with short bowel syndrome and their families, of which there's 20,000 current patients at home on TPN and 2,700 new potential patients created each year in the NICUs across the country. The other customer are the payers, who foot the bill for that $300,000 per year. This is not only for the TPN, but also for those complications and readmissions. So our solution is to cure short bowel syndrome. This is a short-term treatment that's an endoscopic procedure that's not invasive. This induces permanent growth of new functional bowel through a process called mechanotransduction. A little goof up in the slide there, but this is mechanotransduction is a mechanical stimulus that causes cell turnover and tissue growth. This is a principle that's been used in plastic surgery and orthopedic surgery for decades, but had never been applied to intestinal lengthening until my predecessor and mentor for 10 years, Dan Teitelbaum, said, what happens if I push or pull on small bowel? And he was able to grow a lot of small bowel in a very short period of time. He then spent the better part of a decade proving that this wasn't just stretching out intestine, but actually inducing growth of functional bowel. When I joined the lab in 2011, we started working on proof of concept devices that take it to a more clinical product. This is a schematic of our current device. What we have here is a flexible catheter extension mechanism in between two dilating fenestrated mesh balloon attachments. There's also an atraumatic tip to help during placement and the displacement product. The lower panel here shows basically our procedure where we insert the device through an ostomy or natural orifice. The balloons are then inflated to couple to the small bowel. The balloons are then distracted, inducing growth in between the two. The balloons can be deflated and the device recycled. This is a picture of our current product and a video showing that we can basically create tension in between our two attachment points. Those stitches aren't there to help anchor the device, but just to show that we can get that as a reference point. We do have some good intellectual property. We're still waiting on the actual attachment, but we have recent office action, and we look like we're going in the right direction for that. So what's the value? MEND provides a permanent cure for short bowel syndrome. This will allow children to discontinue TPN and eat and drink like their peers. This will greatly improve the quality of life. It will eliminate the need for and complications of TPN. It also eliminates that $300,000 price tag per child. So if you take 300,000 times the 20,000 who are at home on TPN right now, that's $6 billion in annual costs that payers are footing the bill for. Even a partial response carries benefit. This will lower the amount of TPN, but also if children can eat any amount, that will decrease their complication rate and readmission rate. So the advantages, again, is this is a cure, it's a non-invasive short-term treatment, and the majority of short bowel patients are going to be candidates for MEN therapy. So the stakeholders, again, I think I've mentioned, are patients and family and the payers. So the total addressable market is hollow organ lengthening. This can be taken out of small bowel and placed into other hollow organs. But our serviceable addressable market is the short bowel syndrome. Again, there's 2,700 new patients per year in the NICU. Now, children have to grow to toddler size before they can use MEN therapy. And about 35% of those children will either die or wean from TPN without MEN. So our target market is that 65% of the 2,700 or 1,800 new patients stranded on TPN. Now there are some exclusions. Children with extremely short or extremely dilated bowel would not be able to receive MEN therapy. We envision that a patient would undergo about 3 treatments to get to a cure or a positive effect. We'd price each one of these therapies at $500,000, and we envision this as a pay-for-performance model, meaning the company wouldn't get any reimbursement until we have a positive effect. We envision this as starting at Michigan as a center of excellence, but once it takes off, having an East Coast and a West Coast partner. What's out there now to treat short bowel syndrome? Well, there's surgical lengthening, which is a wide open laparotomy in a patient who's already had multiple operations. That's invasive, risky. A very small proportion of the patients are actually eligible for this treatment, and it has a very poor wean rate from TPN. There's also bowel transplant, which is limited to even smaller proportion of the patients because the 5-year survival is just still so poor. There's also some growth hormone that just isn't a great product overall because there's a malignancy risk. The effects have actually been shown to be reversible, and it costs $300,000 per year. So that's $600,000 total for those patients, and it's not approved in kids. So when we look at MEN versus the available products, we think that it's widely applicable, this is curative, it's inexpensive for us to make the device, and it's a low-risk procedure. So what have we done from a regulatory standpoint? Well, we've already been granted humanitarian use device designation. We've had a pre-submission meeting with the FDA just last year, and we've partnered with NAMSA, which is an outside regulatory group. What we'd like to do is apply for early feasibility designation and get breakthrough device status. That basically allows us to go back and forth with the FDA on a speed dial type of operation. We want to get to investigational device exemption, meaning that we can then perform the clinical studies, and eventually get to humanitarian device exemption so we can use these in children. So what are the risks? Well, there are definite technical risks. This is a device that's taken about 18 years to get to where we are right now. There's some parts of the device that aren't medically certified. So we would like to establish partnerships with commercial groups to take the device from our lab, our engineering lab, out into a commercial build. Getting from an academic device to a marketable device, well, we're an academic team. I don't really know how to do that, and the engineers don't know either. But we've contracted with consultants both within the department, within the institution, but also outside firms to help us get to those points. And then there's the biggest risk, the funding gap. To take this from an academic endeavor to a de-risked marketable product. And we've done something a little bit novel here and partnered with a nonprofit organization. So the goal of the nonprofit is to take us through FDA clearance. And what we envision is that the nonprofit will license the technology from the university. And then when the timing is right, the nonprofit will then sublicense to either a startup company or an existing large firm. That would then pay back the IP, but then all the royalties that would come would be split between the university and the nonprofit. The nonprofit would then become an evergreen model and be able to bring new products that can be that are difficult to get to market otherwise. So this is kind of our milestones, and each one of these blue diamonds represents one. And as we were presenting, this is what we kind of had to date. So we already have funding to get to design freeze or concept freeze. Concept freeze. And we wanted to get back to the FDA for another pre-sub meeting to make sure that they agreed that our new safety measures were what they were in line with what they were thinking. We were fortunate and happy to get some funding to use the Innovation Prize money to get a device in hand, to take the product from our engineering lab to a commercial build. We have a lot of costs after that, of course, but this is a very important milestone because that's when the nonprofit, what's aptly named the Teitelbaum Foundation, will start taking over the cost of validating and verifying the design. So again, that's what this money is going to be used for, is to build and verify components of the device and get us into a good lab practice animal testing before applying for our IDE. So this is our group. I'd like to thank again the department for giving the opportunity to talk. I'd be remiss to not put a picture of Dr. Dan Teitelbaum, who was again my mentor for 10 years and the originator of this project and did the lion's share of the work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, so everybody has little audience response devices. You've heard all 4 teams now present, so I want you to pick the team that you thought should be the most investable from your standpoint. And while you're doing that, I'd like all of the teams to come up to the front here, everyone who's presented, and we're going to have a little session here with the Sharks. Before we start that, I do want to acknowledge the 2 other teams that were awarded funding through the program. One is called Hotspot, led by Dr. Tindu Rivamurray, and they have a technology that uses thermochromic liquid crystals that change color, providing an obvious early warning sign that patients can use to determine risk for ulcer formation. So if anyone from that team is here, please stand up. Great. And then the other team that was awarded funding is MultEye Cam Surgery. This is a multi-camera-based integrated imaging system for improved visualization during laparoscopic surgery, led by Dr. Oliver Varman, along with Abi Apakudi and Phil Yang, and Phil's here. So give him a round of applause, too. Okay. I'm going to turn the mic over to the Sharks and let them ask you guys some questions.
I'm the only different one here. So the other 2 actually are used to doing this. So I'll give it to a real venture capital person first, and then I'll ask them follow-up questions. Sure.
And it's just open to any of. Sure. So I have a question about for David regarding the Minute coaching system. And first off, congratulations on some great presentations and some very interesting clinical ideas that you've come up with. My question about the feedback is, are you replacing or making much easier feedback that would already be necessary, or would the use of a system like this increase significantly the level of feedback sought? And I'm just thinking about busy physicians that are, after hours putting in notes into an EMR or otherwise, and maybe at the end of a term they have a half a dozen feedback to provide, and now they have, dozens more because of the frequency of this.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Right now it is additive. Really the bulk of the feedback that we give our learners is face-to-face. It's by the minute. We tell them, you forgot to ask that patient about their coronary artery disease. That's really important if we're going to operate on them. So this is additive right now. Our response rate over the past 3 years is sitting around 65%. So some faculty don't fill these out. Either they feel like they didn't have enough time with the student to give feedback, or they're busy with other things. So really this is an additive thing, but it's kind of a bargaining chip. So if you spend the 1 minute giving the feedback at the end of the day, those 10 to 20 minutes you take at the end of the rotation to give them feedback will be a hell of a lot easier.
Thank you. And while I have it, I'm just going to also ask a question regarding the the MEN device that we just heard of from Matthew. And could you explain a little bit the rationale regarding the 501c3 structure and why you chose that route versus a more traditional means to sort of take the license directly, form a company, and have it funded that way?
as we did some discovery, basically sounded like it was too early and too risky for any entrepreneur to get in at this point. As we were presenting to different funding groups, the 501c was kind of born out of that, because we said, well, an entrepreneur is probably going to be too worried about what still needs to be done and how much needs to be done before we can get to clinical testing. And so the opportunity arose for this company to step in, or nonprofit to step in, and it just seemed like the best way to get us to getting this device into kids, which is our main goal.
Hi, and great job on the presentations. Thank you so much for allowing us to come in and look at them. I have a question for Mike about the surgical asset tracker. How does it integrate with inventory systems that hospitals already use? What's your thinking about that? I mean, it sounds like you're talking about it as a standalone app. I'm just curious as to how you're going to deploy and distribute the product in an environment where these things are already tracked in other systems.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. Thank you for the question. I'll punt slightly, just a surgeon, and I'll ask our engineer exactly how that technical integration will happen. That having been said, my understanding is that reliably we send a bill and reliably we stock our shelves, but that does not translate into reliable information into clinical units that impact patients. As a result, patients are harmed. So we're essentially taking advantage of those inventory systems, or the billing systems in particular, listening for kind of those signals kind of that already exist within hospital systems and pulling them in kind of and translating into the clinical unit. And similarly for when it's removed, we can listen for ureteral stent placed and ureteral stent procedure removal, and then just kind of keep there a ledger. And in a perfect world, that ledger would go beyond just a single institution. So if Mr. Smith has a pacemaker placed in Florida, but he lives in Michigan, then we would be able to kind of search what's this pacemaker that he has in our emergency room right now. So, but I don't think I answered your question because I honestly don't really know.
I mean, really the question is what triggers an entry in the ledger, I think.
And is that bill? But we've noticed that 99+% of when a device is placed, that is documented for the sake of billing. But that billing, kind of reliable kind of documentation has never translated into anything that benefits the patient. It just essentially is that we're good at sending bills.
You answered my second question, was what happens when the patient moves?
Yeah, we're not quite there yet. That's another technological kind of feat. But we have a vision for that.
Thanks.
Just since we're on the asset tracker, a question about the 80% that are often left behind. Are they left behind because they're forgotten about or because the risks of removal are so high? And then if you could also address potentially if those devices are proved to be indwelling for a period of time, or are they actually FDA cleared to be left in permanently?
Yeah, so for the IVC filter, it's approved to be removed. So there's a clinical expectation it is removed. It is just forgotten about. And usually the way this goes down is a patient is critically ill, and they have we do a lot of things to them, and it's just forgotten about. And I'll challenge the clinicians in the room, have you ever thought about when you discharge a patient, that filter that was placed after their trauma and setting up a system where that was removed? I think everyone would say, no, I don't. Of all the things on the list, it's just been forgotten about.
General comments. Every one of these is so impressive because it's solving a real problem. I've had people come to me with questions, ideas, and I said, that's great, but what's the problem you're solving? And they look at me blankly. But these are real problems, every single one of them. On the removal, you make $10,000 for removing. Is that charges or collections? The hospital makes a margin of $10,000 for removing a stent?
Yeah, honestly, I'm not sure I know the answer.
Is it charges and costs and payments are all set?
Medical billing, I would guess that is probably, I'd say the physician fee for that, John Elias may chime in, is probably about $2,000. The professional, the hospital institutional, probably about $20,000. I'd say it's a day procedure. So I don't know how we got it. Sure, I don't know how we got the $10,000 number.
Matt, on this, the method of getting the funding again. So you're effectively 50% of the you're basically splitting it 50-50 with the funder. This method. I mean, for a venture capital, that's a pretty good chunk, isn't it? I mean,
relating to royalties. I don't know if that's an equity.
oh, equity split, just the royalties or however.
Yeah, so royalties. So I've been, again, I'll claim, again, surgeon, not knowing too much about it, but how it's been explained to me is that about 4% of the royalties, or royalties are about 4% that would come back. So it would be 2% to the university and 2% to the nonprofit.
The medical education one, although it isn't the big money maker, it is a huge problem across the board. That's the number one complaint we have from our residents by far, is not regular adequate feedback. Is that an app or is it just a link to a website?
Right now, it's based on the Qualtrics, so it's just links to a web address, and it can be used on an app. So you open it up on your phone. It looks a little bit different than it does on your computer, but it has the same functionality.
It wasn't clear to me whether you had sort of fields, technical, personal interaction, professional. Is that?
We've changed that time and time again. You can put in there whatever you want. Right now, the students have to select what particular thing they want feedback on: technical, H&P skills, physical exam skills, or they can just free text in there, I want feedback about my heart exam.
So the student can request what type of feedback they'd like to have. That's great. And Steve, is that a predicate device or those other things that people have used to try to simulate bone growth? When you go in as a device, they usually say, what is your predicate device that you're comparing this current device if it approved that way?
So we talked about the biologics. They were really the first ones. So there are two different companies that got those biologics, and actually they were fairly widespread. There's a very large market across all fracture healing. Of course, what we want to do is shoehorn in. We potentially could even be used as a device for these radiation fractures. You could actually get an exemption if we decided to move that way, because it's a small group that really don't have any answers to them right now, as you can imagine. That was that Roger Ebert thing that we talked about. But yes, if it wasn't for that biologic, it wasn't for that, it would be a great, and it's still being used off-label. As a black box warning, it's being used off-label because there really is no great answer for this. So as I said, the surgeons are sort of really looking for something that would help these people.
Thank you.
David, I wanted to ask you about whether you can identify students who actually need intervention with the data that you're gathering.
The feedback varies from faculty to faculty, student to student. There's occasionally some red flags that pop up. Part of the clerkship is we do a mid-clerkship feedback session, basically, where the clerkship director and the assistant clerkship director meets with the students. We typically go over all the feedback that they've received in the first 2 to 3 weeks of the rotation and pick up on those kind of issues. The feedback varies in quality, big time. Some people are really good at giving very specific things to work on. There's usually corrective things included in that, but there's some faculty that just do, good job, read more. So it varies from person to person. Yeah.
Thank you.
So now we've heard the discussion. Now it's time to hear how the sharks are going to invest their shares. So each shark gets 10 shares to invest in any of the 4 companies, or all of them a certain amount. So I want to hear how that's going to break down. So we'll start with you, Cohen.
As I think about this, I'm incredibly torn because I'm trying to cure a problem that's such a tragic thing, as a short bowel of this non-healing bone, versus something that I think could actually make money quickly. Surgical asset tracker, I put in 3 shares, and when I finish voting, you'll see what a wimp I am here. For the minute coaching, I only gave 1 share, but I think it's a valuable thing, and come to our department, we'd like to buy it from you. For Oxymed, I give another 3 because it's solving a real problem, and the Mend is another 3 because I think it's just changing a life so radically. Both those other 2 are just changing lives, and changing the life of the children is just really impressive. I should have picked 1, right? I mean, I'm not a real Shark Tank person.
That's okay. I picked 2. So, and I guess I'll preface my comments a little bit with, the perspective of an investor who's running, a fund, venture capital kind of return profile. A lot of this also has to be considered in the context of the market size and what's being addressed and the ability to make money, which oftentimes is aligned with patient needs and clinical needs, but sometimes it is not. So my split of my 10 shares, I was going to invest 7 in the accelerating bone healing and 3 into Mend.
Thanks. Similarly, venture capitalists typically invest in 1 out of 100 companies that he evaluates. It doesn't mean the other 99 have no utility or no value. It just means that the product called venture capital is suitable for certain types of businesses, those that can grow big fast. The others may be, very useful products or valuable products. You just might need a different product. Just like, you wouldn't buy a mortgage on a credit card, right? And so I put all 10 of my shares in Feroxamend because from a return profile, I think that is the one that will generate the best return for a venture capital investment.
Does he have to give some of his shares to save the babies?
All right. So the math is looks like it's in pretty simple, but the winner of the Shark Tank today is Feroxamend. So we have. So, Chitra and Alex, you should come up too. We have these cool little Shark Tank trophies, bobbleheads for each of them, so congratulations. And again, I want to thank our 3 sharks for coming today. It's been a wonderful opportunity to get your input and thoughts on all the teams. There you go, Chitra. There you go. So, and thank you everyone for participating. By the way, the audience response vote echoed what the Sharks voted. So there you go. Thank you all, and